you guys very much for waking up early and coming to this keynote about the digital workplace and Office 365. Let me introduce myself really quick. My name is Vlad Katrinescu. I'm a SharePoint and PowerShell MVP from Montreal, Canada, and I work for one of the sponsors here called Valo Intranet. I also create a few courses for a company called Pluralsight that does a lot of on-demand learning, and I have two books, one of them on SharePoint 2016 and the other one on PowerShell for Office 365 that have nothing to do with today's subject, so I'm not going to talk too much about those. For those of you on Twitter, you can find me at Vlad Katrinescu. I know it's really easy to spell. Everybody can get it the first try. But if you search Vlad, there's not that many Vlads doing SharePoint, so hopefully I'll be one of the first faces up there. Something else that I'm really proud of. This is my 13th SharePoint Fest. I've been doing those since Seattle in 2015. So I did 2 in 2015, 4 in 2016, 4 in 2017, and this is my third one in 2018. So really happy to be here and give the second day keynote for you guys today. So let's get started. Today, every organization, big and small, is digital. With the latest technology, usually we only looked at tech companies using the latest tech, using the cloud, using VR or mixed reality as they call it now. But today, every company is digital. Even companies that were known to be more conservative in the past. Ford, for example, in a recent interview, the CEO of Ford said that 10 years ago, during the last recession, they were afraid, what if we don't make cars anymore? But today, instead, they're afraid of what if we only build cars in the future. Instead, he looks at Ford as a company that builds sophisticated computers on 4 wheels. Goldman Sachs, which is one of the biggest banks in the world, hires more engineers and programmers than Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So all of the companies are changing to become digital, to become tech companies. And there's a good reason for that. Out of the Fortune 500 list in 1955, only 11% remain. Companies that didn't adapt are simply not there anymore. Even more, according to a study by a research company called InnoSight, whereas in 1965, a company used to spend 33 years in average on the Fortune 500 list, by 2019, that average will be down to only 14 years. If that statistic holds up, by the next decade, half of the Fortune 500 today will be replaced by new companies. So being the biggest company, being the companies that has the most money, that has the most customers today, doesn't mean you're guaranteed to survive. Jeff Bezos, which is the richest man on earth, I think now, with how well Amazon went recently, did an all-hands meeting in November, so only a month ago, to his employees. And one of the questions that came up was, what did you learn from other retailers going bankrupt, such as Sears, for example? And what he answered is that one day Amazon will fail. One day Amazon will go bankrupt. The lifespan of big companies is a lot smaller than it used to be. Funnily enough, if you look at statistics, the companies that live the longest are breweries. This is the most common type of company that lives 100 or more years. So what does this tell you about us, right? And I mean, this is the perfect community for that because we're the ones that have the SharePoint after every day at a conference. So we're definitely encouraging that kind of industry. Over the next 3 years, most CEOs believe that the next 3 years will have a bigger impact over their industry than the last 50. But at the same time, when you ask those same CEOs, what is the digital workplace? How do you define it? How do you actually implement it? You get a face that kind of looks like that, because most people are like, I don't know, we'll go to the cloud and that's about it. there's a reason why most people, especially C-level executives, cannot really define it. The fact is that over the last 11 years, we've seen more change in tech than we've ever seen before. Is it crazy to think that the first iPhone only got released 11 years ago? So think at it, that 12 years ago, the coolest gadget that would have is the Motorola Razr phone that had a 1.3-inch screen with a 2-megapixel camera, and you had to press 4 times on the 8 in order to write a T. And now they're working on stuff that you think at something and it automatically writes it on your phone. The term selfie didn't even exist that day. The front-facing camera, we actually had to hold the phone the other way and try to make it work after like 5 or 6 times. So technology has definitely evolved. The way that people work has also changed. Whereas we used to have to go at the office to work. I mean, 10 years ago, I remember when I was doing SharePoint projects, there's no client that would let me do SharePoint remotely. I would have to go on site every day, and I was not living downtown. I remember it very well because I was living on the South Shore. So it was about 1.5 hours of public transport to the client and back for quite a few years in order to work on my projects. And even my consulting company, even if I had no projects, I still had to go there and do the same thing I was doing at home. But now, I mean, how many of you work remote at least once a week? Most of you. How many of you think you're more productive when you work remote? Thank you. So the way that we work has changed, and the culture has adapted to embrace that change. We also have more information to deal with and more work to do than ever before. According to Forbes, 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the problem was, how do we get information? How do we know how much stock we have in the warehouse? We needed to get somebody to actually go scan items and know and calculate it. Now with the Internet of Things, everything has a sensor on it, everything is tagged. So it's super easy to have all of the information. The only problem is, how do we actually make sense of all of the information that we have? Even looking at keeping up to date with Office 365, which is a small part of what you do in your day-to-day job. There's so much information out there that it's impossible to actually keep up to it. And that's why the work culture has changed from traditional siloed teams to actually the open network, where you don't need to go to your manager who will go to the manager of your colleague in order to actually be able to ask him a question that would take 2 seconds to answer. Communication has become the most important part of our day. How do we work together and use that swarm intelligence? Projects are getting bigger and more complicated as we're trying to push the boundaries of what every organization does. And the only thing that will make us get there is, how do we work together? Simply put, today's companies cannot use 19th century type of management of you have to be there in person, clock in at 8 a.m. and 20th century tools to do 21st century work. As I showed you guys a few statistics earlier, we've actually covered 3 main topics that we're going to dig in deeper in the next few minutes. The advancements in technology and the advancements in work culture, about how the work culture has changed, and lastly, people. So let's first talk about technology and take a quick step back in time and talk about our favorite tool, SharePoint. And we're going to go back all the way to SharePoint 2007. Who here was around for SharePoint 2007? A few of you. How many of you remember when SharePoint 2007 got released? Come on. A few of you. You don't want to say the date? November 3rd, 2016. That's before the iPhone. Remember, SharePoint 2007 had workflows, business intelligence, document versioning, custom forms. You can even create a public website with it. And it was awesome. Now I know that today people are like, oh, but SharePoint 2007 was not responsive. That term didn't even exist back then. Responsive design got invented in 2010. Imagine the people at Microsoft that were coding this for 3 years, starting in 2003, that the coolest thing they had was probably a 1-inch screen. Do you think they were thinking about making it work on mobile? So back then, SharePoint 2007 became huge. It was the coolest thing that you could have. And we used it for everything. And that's something that was not only 2007, that's something that stuck with us for quite a while. SharePoint kind of became the synonym of collaboration. You wanted a small team site or project site, go to SharePoint. You wanted an intranet, an extranet, even a public-facing website. SharePoint would be the answer. You wanted to do reporting, archiving, planning projects. SharePoint would always be the answer to everything. And that kind of was good at the time because SharePoint was the only collaboration tool. But then what happened is in 2007, the technology we had at home was not advanced at all. So we'd go into Office, and that's where we would get all of the latest tech. The only way to actually upgrade and get access to new tech was to wait for our IT people to deploy the new version of SharePoint. And then, wow, we now have content types and managed metadata in 2010. And then by the time that IT has upgraded to a new version of SharePoint, maybe 4 or 5 years later, cloud computing for the consumer tools came along. So we started seeing products such as Dropbox, Facebook, Google Drive, Trello. And the work advanced way faster. The type of projects that we did, the type of work that we had to do changed way faster than internal IT could adapt. So users started using consumer tools, and that gave birth to the term shadow IT. What the big change that happened is that whenever we thought about collaboration, we thought about files. Because SharePoint was collaboration, where would all of the knowledge sharing happen? You'd have to document it, put it somewhere in SharePoint. You had an email about the project, you'd have to drag it on your desktop and then upload it inside of SharePoint. All the collaboration was just thought as SharePoint. And don't get me wrong, getting the right tool for the right job is important. So it's no wonder that people actually went to different tools such as Trello, all of the ones I mentioned before, to get the job done. But the problem with using so many different tools is that they're not integrated together. So when you switch between 5 or more applications every day, especially when they don't have the same UI, they don't have the same, even the same login, you use about 30% of your productivity. And this is where a change happened in enterprise IT, and Office 365 came along. I mean, it came along a bit before that, but in the last few years, it really almost, well, I'm going to say almost all, but at least 50% of the organizations started adopting the Microsoft Cloud. The advantage of Office 365 is not only that it has a ton of different tools. So we have, I would say, even maybe too many tools that do the exact same thing. But it's all integrated. Everything talks to each other. And I think from a technology perspective, that is one of the key requirements of the digital workplace. Not having the feeling that you work with 25 different applications in your day-to-day work. Is how do we have a specific application for each type of task that will allow me to do the job better, but that is well integrated. And I really don't switch from one app to another. I'm still in my sandbox, in my Office 365, and also accessible from everywhere. As you guys seen from the keynote, I hope you're not surprised that I'm talking about Office 365. But one of the things that is also really important is it's always up to date. It's something that we've seen earlier in the keynote is that migrating to 365 today and then giving up, saying that we're going to use those 5 tools, we're going to disable everything else, will not actually get you far. Yeah, you'll be fine for the next few years. But one of the cool things with Office 365, and why I personally believe from a technology perspective is the best platform to go with, it's always updated. I mean, look at the stuff they're working on today. Virtual reality inside of SharePoint. Most of you, like me probably today, you're like, okay, but how will I use that? Because I mean, my users can't even use content types. And now I ask them to go and do 3D models and play around with things. But I mean, 10 years ago, business intelligence and having users creating their own charts to dig down in things was like, they're never going to be able to do that. All of the stuff from movies that we're looking at 10, 15 years ago, and now it's all reality that we have on a day-to-day basis. And even if you don't use it today, it will be in the platform for you to use tomorrow. Another big change, artificial intelligence. That will change the way that we work. It will not replace humans, but it will just allow us to do our job better. According to Gartner, by 2020, the average person will spend more time talking with bots than with their spouses. And as I was showing my slides to my good friend Liz yesterday, her reaction was, are you sure? I have the feeling I'm already doing that today. Every time you call a call center, who do you talk to for 5 minutes before actually talking to a person? It's like, what is your date of birth? What are you calling for? Every time you look for support today, that's the first step. You talk to a bot. Every time you do an online chat to actually talk with a company, you're going to talk with a bot. And we're starting to see that trend in the enterprise as well. For example, in Microsoft Teams, a good example I was playing with a bit earlier this year is a bot called Zoom.ai. And one of the cool things that you can do with it is you can ask it to go find information about people. As a salesperson, I mean, we're all salesperson, even if we're tech. When I go in a meeting, I go meet new people, I always try and go and see, okay, who is that person? What are they interested in? So instead of having to go to LinkedIn, to Facebook, to Twitter, find out about that person, I can simply ask them, who is that person? And I mean, this is basic information. I could have probably found it in just a simple search. But where it gets interesting is where that bot took about 2 minutes to actually look at the history of what I posted on Twitter, what I posted on all of my public profiles, and give me a personality snapshot of what Vlad Catrinescu is like. What are the different interests that things that I'm interested in? How I should approach this person? How that person likes to be communicated? And I actually, last night, I showed this to one of my colleagues without any context. I took a snapshot of only the personality snapshots, the 3 points. And I'm like, so what do you think? I just did a test online. Do you think this represents me well? He's like, yeah, this is pretty much you. Like, what test did you do? I'm like, it was actually not a test. I just asked a bot to analyze me. His reaction was, of course, this is cool. Really creepy, but cool. And that's something that we're going to have to kind of adapt with as IT people, is that technology advances so fast that at some point it can even be a bit creepy, all of the stuff that we can do with tech. And of course, this is just an example, but whereas a few years ago we're always making fun of whenever we talk to a computer, we must say, computer, do this. and would never actually understand us. Would have to actually repeat it 5 times, and there was always jokes on the TV and even in movies about how do we talk with computers. But today, all of that natural machine learning has advanced immensely. We don't have the feeling that we talk to a computer anymore. How many of you have seen the keynote of the Google Developer Conference last year, when they actually built a bot that would call a hairdresser shop and get an interview? And that bot was so real, it will actually say, oh, when are you available? Let me check my calendar. Like all of the emotion, all of the all of the different things. And that's when I think people really started to freak out of like, okay, if I would have heard that conversation on the phone, I would have had no idea that it's actually a computer talking to me on the other end of the line. Computers are starting to have emotions. I mean, I really hope that my Teams is not going to start writing to me back that I hurt its feelings, but computers are starting to really be able to understand what we want, when we want it, and replace some of the boring stuff that we do on a day-to-day basis. How many of you use Cortana to actually schedule meetings with external people? None. Few of you over there. There's actually an add-in that you can add to your Outlook. As a product evangelist, I schedule a lot of demos with people, and finding times, especially when you're trying to find a meeting time with 4 people from 4 different organizations, always takes about 25 back and forths. And that's something that honestly, I don't want to do as part of my day-to-day basis. So that's the cool part. I can simply put in my email, hey, yeah, let's schedule a meeting. Hey, Cortana, please schedule a 30-minute meeting with those people next week. Cortana will automatically look at my calendar and then send out emails to everybody. Hey, here are some proposed time. Can you make it? Can you not make it? They can select a few options, or if not, say, hey, I cannot make any of those times. Then Cortana will come back to my calendar and automatically look at some other available options. And it will keep that conversation going without me having to do anything else until the meeting gets scheduled. Of course, from personal experience, if you use that, make sure your calendar is up to date. Because if not, you might end up doing product demos from the beach in Hawaii. Not that it ever happened to me, but make sure your calendars are up to date. So we talked a lot about technology, and we started talking a bit about adapting our processes and our culture to work with this new technology. But some of the biggest blockers I've seen recently is the balance between what control do we have on that technology. When I showed you guys that example of the personality snapshot, how many of you thought it was creepy? Okay, now how many of you think that IT pros, admins that used to have control over everything, are scared at night because Microsoft enabled self-site creation and self-creation on everything, Office 365? Few of you. Really, the way that we have to look at IT and the way that we have to look at that control, because let's be honest, people having to go inside the office to actually do work, people having to go at a client site to actually do work, it was about control. It was about trust. I'm sure they didn't really care to see my face every day there in the morning and getting free coffee at my client site. That's not what they wanted me to be there. They wanted me to be there because the only way they could trust that I'm actually working is to see my face looking at SharePoint on the screen and doing stuff. But we now kind of face that same problem with internal IT. Whereas IT back in on-premises SharePoint, and even in some Office 365 environments, had control of everything. You want to do anything, you go through IT. You want to create a new site, you want to change permissions, you want to do anything, you need to go through IT. And that led to huge waste of time. According to Oxford, people waste 24 working days a year waiting for technology. So whether it's clicking on something and seeing the famous working on it sign, I mean, it was impossible for me not to add this in the keynote. But whether it's actually waiting on technology to do something, so waiting on it to deliver results, let me download that file, or let me see the information about that report, or whether it's I need to collaborate with an external user, but the only way for me to get that external user to have access to my things is to ask IT to create a new FTP server or to create a new SharePoint site, enable a form-based authentication on it, create a username, and then of course for security reasons, send them their username and password in 2 different emails, because that's way more secure. So if we have too much control, what will happen is that people will stop being interested. People will stop using our tools. And that's not where we're going. We're going in a direction where the business user has more power than ever. Look at tools such as Flow, Power Apps, Power BI. You don't need to be an IT pro. You don't need to be a developer anymore to actually get those tools and to actually be able to create cool things. Anybody, and the big reason for that is not only that the tools are a lot easier, is that, again, think at it. Everybody today that is 18 years old, they had an iPhone starting when they were 6. So they had this technology. They grew up with this technology. They had Facebook, became public in 2004. So the enterprise social network, whereas for most people, at least people that have been doing SharePoint for a while, is like, ooh, I'm not sure if I want to let this open. I'm not sure what will happen if we implement a social network inside the organization. A lot of the new generation actually grew up with that and has experience, has lived with that all of their lives. When you go to college, what do you use? A lot of colleges use Google Docs, where everything is web, everything is super fast, everything is super easy to use. And then they come in the enterprise world, and then they have to use SharePoint 2010. And they're like, wait, how can I download 2 documents at the same time? Oh, well, you can't yet, but we're upgrading in 2 years. So if you don't achieve that balance between, having a balance between what IT controls and what we allow the business user to build, the big problem is that the business users will just get out their credit card, get that $100 per year expense approved, and buy whatever tool they need to actually get the work done. Because the work we do has evolved. And if nothing else changes in the way that we're allowed to work, the technology that we have to do our job, well, we're still evaluated. Our bonus still depends on us getting the job done. So we're going to find ways to actually get to it. Also, not spending 5 years to actually implement something. Who here has done an intranet project on SharePoint 2007 or 2010? It takes about 1 year. Anybody here got it make more than 1 year? Most of you. So we used to custom code everything. Every time we wanted to build something, we'd get a full army of developers in, code everything custom, have everything 100% of that requirement. And if that marketing person who was the sponsor wanted that pixel to be green, and it cost $100,000, we'd still get more developers in to make sure that pixel is green. But by the time we actually finished that intranet project, well, the next version of SharePoint actually already came out. So we're like, Well, we just invested $1 million in this new intranet, so we're not going to upgrade right away because we know that Microsoft now switched from farm solutions to sandbox solutions, and then to the app model, and then to the SharePoint framework. So that's going to cost us another $1 million to actually upgrade. So using out-of-the-box tools, and I actually stole this slide from one of my good friends from Europe, Gökhan, that E equals MC2. Error equals more code, power 2. I updated it just a bit because we always used to have this slide when both me and my friend Gökhan are IT pros. So you know how IT pros and devs, we always like to, well, not like, we love to make fun of each other in sessions. So we always get this slide. I updated it a bit now with, it doesn't work on my machine anymore, it works in my tenant. So really adapting to the reality of the 80-20. What can we achieve really fast, even if it's not the result that we want at 100%? The business requirement is today. Can we use those out-of-the-box tools to get 80% of that requirement and allow our business user to actually get the job done tomorrow? Instead of saying, ooh, you want to have an external site. Let me create a project team. Let me get a project manager on it. Let's build a team. We're going to have a few meetings, and we're going to decide on the best way to do it. By the time you have that first project meeting, that user already put that document in Dropbox and actually shared it with their users. And again, it's not only about tech, it's about culture. I was consulting, before joining Valo, I was consulting for a company that they wanted to migrate to the digital workplace. So the first thing that they told me, we want to migrate to the digital workplace, I was like, first red flag. But anyway, let's go on and see what will happen. And I was on the IT pro side. And we get there, we do the migration to Office 365, and then what do? There's an option that I hate to talk about because I don't want to give ideas to people. You can actually block people from signing into Office 365 from outside the company network. So even if now they're on the latest tools available, people had to VPN inside their company network to go to Office 365. That's kind of what happens when you want to migrate to the digital workplace and you only look at the technology part of it. And that's one of the big reasons why by 2020, 50% of the digital transformation initiatives will fail. It's not only about having the right technology, migrating to Office 365 or to any other platform out there. I mean, of course, we're in the Microsoft conference, so hopefully none of you are on G Suite unless you want to learn how to migrate off of it. But whatever technology you decide to embrace and adopt, if you only look at going to the digital workplace as a migration, you're really not going to go far. Because you can have all of the tools in the world. And I mean, like I said, the problem nowadays hasn't really been about having the right tools, having access to them. It's been mostly about which one to use. And that's a struggle that, I think all of us now has a bit is, okay, how many tools do I have to communicate with somebody directly? I can do it via Yammer, I can send a direct message, via Skype for Business, via Teams, and now we have Pizala that we can actually use to communicate with people. So it's not only about having the right tools, but if we do not change the way that we work, you can have the best tools out there. You can have SharePoint Spaces preview and work in VR. If you're going to have 15 versions of that document, even if that document is mixed reality, and you're going to keep adding V1, V2, V3, V4 next to it, and have 8 people work on their own offline copy in VR, of course, you're not going to get further in your digital workplace transformation. So it's not only about tech, it's not only about work culture, but it's about us. When you guys go to work, do you always try to see, okay, well, actually, let me ask a different question. How open is everybody to change? Bill Gates said that the biggest blocker to technology is not the actual tech, is are we ready yet to adopt that technology? And this is the hard part, is that people are afraid of change. People that have been there in an organization for a while, they know how to do that job. And they've been doing the same job for 10 years now. They've been doing it the exactly same way. And they don't want to change because oftentimes they're like, yeah, maybe it takes me longer to actually do this, but I know how to do it. And this is where user training comes in. Over 44% of employees say that insufficient user training has led to them not actually using the company tools, but using the stuff that they were used to. That's because people are afraid. People are afraid that they're the one person that was able to do this specific task inside of the company. If anybody had a question about that, they were the guru. They were the must-have person to get that. And as technology changes, they realize that, hey, now everybody can do it, and I'm losing control of that small piece. But they're not looking necessarily at the greater good, at how can I actually achieve more with this technology or with the new way of working than I was ever able to do before. So that's why the title of this keynote was that, yes, the digital workplace is about technology. Because you cannot really evolve. You cannot be on the latest and greatest if you're still on SharePoint 2007. And yes, it was cool back then. You could do things that probably nobody could imagine that you would ever have at home. So being on the latest and greatest technology is a big part of it. Adapting to the new way of working, not forcing people to come in the office to work. Accepting the fact that there's multiple ways of doing things. I mean, look at how Office 365 adapted. Oh, you want to use SharePoint? You can use it inside Teams. You can use it inside the browser. You can use it on the phone. You want to look at your Power BI reports? Where are you working? Where are you the most productive person to be working? Whether you like Teams, the browser, your mobile phone. So we need to accept that change, that people, different people are productive different ways. But we also need to change the way we work. We need to stop being afraid of adapting new technologies and changing the way we work. As I close this keynote, I actually want to close it on a quote from Orhan Harari. The electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of the candle. Sometimes we need to stop looking at, okay, this is the way that we're doing things today. How can we do it a bit better? Can we get a torch instead of a candle? We need to sometimes look outside of the box, stop being limited by all of the things that we're doing today, and rather look, what do I have to do? What are the tools that I have available? And really break out of that mold. And you guys here today and tomorrow, you still have some of the best speakers in North America, and even some from across, from Europe, that will show you guys how to use the latest and greatest Microsoft technologies to do your job. As you listen to them, try not to say, okay, how do I take it to the next level? But really try to see, can I completely disrupt the way that my company is working and be able to implement a whole new process that will bring us to the next level? Thank you guys very much. I hope that you have enjoyed.